There's an estimate that I saw the other day when Bill and I were talking about kind of the state of the church, that in 2019, the year before the pandemic, more Protestant churches closed than opened in the U.S. Now, I know I don't need to tell you all this. You know this better than I do. But in 2014, 4,000 churches opened and 3,700 churches closed. In 2019, 3,000 churches opened and 4,500 churches closed. An even greater number of churches have closed their doors in the past few years. A 2020 survey found that the average congregation size across Christian denominations is less than half of what it was in 2000, down to 65 from 137. It also found that on average, a third of churchgoers are 65 or older, which is twice that age group's representation in the general population. In New York, San Francisco, Miami, and even in New Haven, developers are chomping at the bit to come in and get their hands on our sacred spaces, to turn them into luxury condos. But in poorer communities and in rural communities, often churches just sit there and nothing happens to them. So it's against this backdrop of really difficult and painful news that we applied for funding through the Thriving Congregations Initiative of the Lilly Endowment in 2020, and with Lilly funding, we launched Reimagining Church in 2021. So I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about what this project is, and then we'll open up the conversation with Bob and Frank after we see the video with Jordan. So this is a 5-year project, as most grants, are always time limited. They always ask us, how are you going to sustain this grant going forward? And kudos to Dean Sterling, who kind of gave us the nod and said, we'll figure it out. Okay, so maybe we will, but we know now that it's 5 years. And we are working with congregations, at least to start, in the greater New Haven region. In the grant, we said New England. We're not quite there yet, and we may not get there, but we've started with congregations in the state from Simsbury down to Stamford, out to North Branford, and now in Middletown. We've worked with 10 churches in each of the first 2 years, and this year we have 5 churches. It's usually in the spring semester that we start to have these conversations with congregations to see who's interested. What are you about? What do you want to be about? Would you like to work with us? Let us tell you a little bit about it. At the same time, we start recruiting students, and I'll tell you why in a minute, to talk about, would you like to do this in your 3rd year? So the students must be in their 3rd year of study, and they must have done an internship already. So at the heart of this work, which I know you're wondering, what is this work? I'm getting there. At the heart of this work are the people in the congregation. So when we meet with pastors who say, yes, we're on, we want to do this, we say to them, Bob, would you pick 5 to 8 people in your congregation who don't normally hold leadership positions, who certainly currently are not on your vestry or not on your church council, but people that are really committed to the congregation, who, oh, hello, who, that was startling, who are committed to the congregation no matter how long they've been there. They may be new members, they may have a long history of membership in the church, but they're really eager to bring the church into something new. And maybe they have some ideas about what that is. They also have to have a pretty good commitment to time, because this is a rigorous year of work for both the students and the members of the working groups. The students meet regularly with these folks, and it's a process. We talk about process a lot in this Reimagining program, and we have to, because this is no easy task to reimagine what church might be in the 21st century. We don't know what it's going to be. And one of the questions we get regularly is, what is Yale going to tell us to do? We expect you to have all the answers. Well, we don't, do we? That's not part of the deal. We didn't promise either one of you that we had answers, but we're going to give you a lot of questions to think about. And so the student's role is to be the facilitator of these working groups. And they will meet regularly with these 5 to 7 people. And then this could be every other week. It could be once a week, doubtful that much, but it's intense work for our students. They have to give time to this, 10 to 15 hours a week, just like they would in a normal internship. And we meet with them regularly. So this class that goes along with the reimagining is team taught, thank goodness, with Bill Gettler, who's the Associate Dean for Community Education or some such title as that. I have it written down here somewhere. And Reverend Joanne Jennings, who's the Director of Black Church Studies. So together we work with the students along a curriculum that gives them the tools to become really good facilitators in this work. So I know you're asking, what is this work? What are you talking about? Well, so again, the work is not bringing answers to the congregations, but the work is really trying to tease out from members of this working group, first, kind of what is this congregation? Tell us your story. Give us your history. Tell us a little background. And then tell us some more background, and let's dig deep to find out where you've come from. We just had a plenary session with Susan Beaumont, who some of you will know as a church consultant, who's the author of How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going. And if you haven't read it, I want to recommend it to you all. Who spent a lot of time talking to this year's cohort about that storytelling and about sitting with our history. Because if we don't know where we've come from, how are we going to know where we're going? Our history certainly informs that direction for the future. So the students, for the most of the first semester, are really helping the members of this working group access that. And sometimes there's grief in those stories. Sometimes there's a real sense of loss. We hear a lot of, oh, we just want to take the church back where we were 20 years ago. You're nodding, you've heard that before. Or we want to bring more kids into the church. You've heard that before. It may be your own heart's desire to do that. Yes, we all want that. Great. How are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? That's the big question of the day. How do we go back to 137? And if we can't do that, what does church mean? So that's the work. The work of this first semester is really about process, about listening deeply, about asking those kinds of questions, about moving with this cohort over the span of 10 weeks to get at the deepest questions they have about their church and to start to think about, oh, maybe we could do this. Maybe we could do that. It's not just the 3 of us that prompt these questions, but we invite visionary leaders from around the country to come in and work with us. So this fall, we had the great good fortune to work with Susan Beaumont, who spent 2 days with us. The first meeting was with the students and the pastors. The second day was with all of the members of the working group, the pastors and the students together. And it was a terrific day. We came away enthused, inspired, really having a deeper understanding of how we do this work together. We've had people, the first year we invited Becca Stevens, who is the founder of Thistle Farms. I love all the nodding. Y'all know Becca. If you don't, go look up this Thistle Farms and the exciting work that she does. We had Tyler Sitt, who is the church planter in Minneapolis, who has, I think it's Next City Church. He is a young, vibrant, very out Methodist minister who loves to just try things. And so we thought, let's bring him here and hear about how he has done that in his community. So it's, and we had Michael Martin. If you're not familiar with Still Meadow Fellowship in Baltimore, please go Google that as well. So Michael found himself in this congregation that's a part of a 10-acre piece of land that had been undeveloped when he got there. And he spent a few years trying to dream with his church, how do we reimagine being church with this piece of property? I won't tell you his story, but I will encourage you to go look at Still Meadow Fellowship and Still Meadow Peace Park. So this is a year-long work, as I've said. The students begin in September and they go through May. We have this class that we work with them together. And at the end of the year, in that second semester, we drill down a little bit more concretely. What's next? What's next for this congregation? What do you want to do next? What do you think might happen in this congregation if you did X, Y, Z? And then we're able to offer some small mini grants that range from, I don't know, I think I wrote a check. Well, I didn't write a check, but somebody here wrote a check for $200 to a congregation from last year. But we've also given up to 10,000? 10,000. So it's a possibility of offering congregations small grants to help jumpstart. It's not sustainable. It's not sustained funding, but it's to get you launched. It's to help you launch whatever you think you're going to do next. And we'll hear from these guys what their congregations are doing. But they've been anywhere from renovating a wing to be able to rent out some space to new signage to different technology all over the map. You can learn more about Reimagining Church, because I'm going to stop talking, if you go to our website, which is reimaginingchurch.yale.edu. It's a website under construction, but it's there. And what's fascinating about that website is that you can read blog posts from our students and from other folks who've been involved in the program since the beginning to read about their hopes, their dreams, their anxieties, their excitement, their resistance. All those things are all there in the blog posts. And you'll find out more about the work that we're doing. This has been a real nutshell. This has been just the top of what we're doing. We could talk for days about all the things that we do, but I want to turn our attention to our folks that are with us today. And the first is Jordan Sylar, who couldn't be here. She's out serving a church in California, but she agreed to do a Zoom interview for us. And so if you'll cue the video, we'll get out of the way so you can see it. Jordan, it's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Thanks for joining us in this conversation today about Reimagining Church. You participated as a student here just last year in your third year at YDS, and congratulations again on your recent graduation. And you are now the associate minister at Asbury United Methodist Church out in California. Congratulations on that as well. That's very exciting. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about your experience with Reimagining Church. Can you tell us a little bit about the congregation that you served?
Yeah, sure. So I got to work with a congregation in Madison, Connecticut. It was the First Congregational Church of Madison. They are kind of a traditional New England congregation, UCC. They have a very historic building. They have an aging population, mostly like demographics are mostly white and affluent, and it's a really beautiful town. And the people were they love their community, they love their church, they're very committed and involved, and really good pastoral leadership as well. But even with those things, they did have kind of concerns about the long-term viability of the church because they were aging and because they were looking for things like hoping to have new families join, or wanting more youth in the youth ministry and things like that. So
the previous year you served as an intern there, didn't you?
Yes.
Usual way for our students in Reimagining Church to enter into the relationship, but it really worked out just fine for you, I think.
Yeah, I think it was a unique way to do the project because I already knew so much about them and already had these connections. And I think it also really highlighted for me the way this project of Reimagining Church is unique because I had spent a whole year there as a seminarian and then got to do this project, and it was entirely different and I learned entirely new things. So it was a good experience.
How did the congregation respond to the whole of Reimagining? How did they respond to the work that you and that working group did together? And tell us about the response that they had.
They were very enthusiastic. They were very excited. I think a project like Reimagining Church is really exciting because it's full of possibility. And I think that they were a little bit confused in the beginning just because they wanted, they all had their ideas and they all wanted to take the project into a certain direction. So there was a lot of excitement and a lot of work to narrow down kind of the direction of the project. And we had, for example, a luncheon where we talked to the congregation, and over 60 people attended from a church that has like 150 people. So quite a bit of the congregation attended, and they all had really insightful things to say. I think it was interesting for them because they love the church so much that they attend every week, and they brought this passion for the church, but also kind of an awareness of they wanted to try something new and like share what they loved with the community. So they responded well with a lot of enthusiasm.
How big was your working group?
We had 4 members in our working group.
Just 4 members.
Just 4, yeah. 4 very enthusiastic members. And it was a really diverse working group as well. They were anywhere between like 30 and 80 years old, and they had all kinds of different life experiences, and they didn't really know each other that well in the beginning either. So it was neat to see them mesh over the time and share like a unified goal.
You said earlier that you learned a lot. So tell us a few things that you learned from your experience with the project that we call Reimagining Church.
Yes. I think I probably had 2 takeaways or 2 big takeaways. The first one was just simply the skill of group facilitation. I think that ended up being more challenging than I expected, just trying to keep the group on task, but not smother their new ideas. And also kind of empower them to say what they want and do what they want, and only be there as a guide and not kind of push my own perspectives and biases on them. And then I also think the biggest takeaway I had, biggest thing I learned that I'm definitely carrying into my work now as a minister, is just seeing ministry through a creative lens. I think that this project taught you to listen to the people who are there, the people who have been there for a long time, and to listen to the community. We did things like asset mapping and researching the community. And I think finding creative ways to meet the needs that are there is huge. And also, I think seeing ministry as like a truly collaborative process between me, the congregation, God, and just asking these questions like, what does God want from us, and what new things might God be leading us into? And I just couldn't be an effective minister now without asking those questions that I got to ask in Reimagining Church.
Thank you for that answer. I'm reminded from that of all the things that we talked about in the year that we spent together with your class in Reimagining Church. And of course, all the classes are different, and the conversations take different, directions depending on who's in the group from year to year. But tell me about now. Here you are at Asbury United Methodist Church. This is your first parish as a recent graduate of YDS with your M.Div. What do you bring into this new role from Reimagining Church? How do you see that work now from your perch as you at Asbury?
I truly think that this work in Reimagining Church just taught me a posture of curiosity and creativity, and it showed me that there are people in the congregation always with bright ideas and energy to enact the ideas, but they have to be included and they have to be listened to and empowered to take ownership of the direction of their church. And so I think that's something that I will carry. I feel like now I see every church, but especially Asbury, because I'm here, as just a place full of so much possibility, like so many resources and people, and there's just a richness to what could happen there that I don't think I would have seen before Reimagining.
So you're really approaching this with a reimagining lens, which I couldn't have asked for any better response than that. Thank you for that. What would you say to any congregation who's considering participating in Reimagining Church?
I would say that I would acknowledge that it probably sounds scary, right? Because if you're going to your church, you like how it is. The idea of reimagining may sound overwhelming, but I would just tell them to embrace the process, to not see it as something that could change the thing that they love into something they don't love, but to see it as just taking the gifts that are already there and empowering them to do something new and share those gifts with the community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. It's great to see you, and congratulations again on your new position out there in California.
Thank you so much.
Don't you love the energy of our graduates? I'll come back up here. I mean, Jordan is just full of excitement about church, and we'll see great things from her ministry in Asbury. But we're seeing great things from ministry right here in New Haven, and I'm so happy again to have Bob and Frank with us. Can you tell us about your congregations a little bit? Short. Go ahead, Frank. Are you on?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see you. And thanks, Alison. Thanks for 2 invitations. The first one to join Reimagining Church, and the second to be here today.
Yeah.
It's been fun. I do have some big ideas and I want to share, but I will go right to your question to start. I am a member of Shalom UCC, and we're based in New Haven, downtown New Haven. We meet at the Parish House, the United Church Parish House. We are a legacy congregation. We actually were started in 1757 as part of the university. We were, for a long time, the Church of Christ in Yale. And when that church ceased to exist in about 2011, there were a bunch of us that wanted to keep worshiping together. And after lots of discernment and conversations with the conference, we realized that we had the beginnings of another church. We were reimagining even then, and decided we would go forward as Shalom UCC, leaning into our peace and justice commitments and issues of equity and a real devotion to New Haven and its challenges and its delights and joys. And we've maintained that even as we've moved around the city from spot to spot, growing the congregation. We're not a huge congregation. We're probably online and our email 50 or 60, in person 30. We top out at 30. And we have some of the same challenges that you mentioned, I think, in the opening that we're wrestling with. But we transitioned from in-person meeting and a liturgy that really is kind of amazing, because we have a lot of folks who are theologically trained, many of them from this very divinity school. So we were able to create something that allows folks to be very present and everybody to do something in the worship, and it's a very participatory worship. But it also feels like it's grounded in the kinds of things people want when they go to church. And that really is unique and special to us. We also have worked with lots of YDS MIDs, and that's been a really big part of who we are as a church, is moving folks who want to become traditional ministers into ministry. And we had someone just recently ordained into a new church start in Hawaii, and we have somebody who is circling the ordination process right now.
Great.
And yeah, I guess that's the top notes, and I can add more later.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Alison, for inviting me.
Thank you.
I am the pastor at Grace and St. John's Church in Hamden, which is the Episcopal Church in Hamden. Some of you might know it. It's right across the street from the police station in Hamden and the Old Town Hall at the corner of Dixwell and Whitney. Grace and St. John's is the result of 2 mergers. So Grace Church was started in 1790, and then St. Peter's on the Hill joined them in the mid-90s, I believe. And now most recently, officially last fall, we were joined by St. John the Evangelist in Yalesville. So we were for a while, Grace and St. Peter's, but part of our merging discernment was to now include the name St. John's. And in order to honor the history of St. Peter's, we actually reconfigured and renamed our side chapel as St. Peter's Chapel. We're a relatively small congregation, so we probably, if you looked on the parish rolls with family members included, probably 80 to 100 members. We get about 50 or 55 folks on a Sunday morning. As you heard in my bio, we are the hosts of Dinner for $1, which is a weekly, and now as of last week, 4 times a week dinner ministry. We have a food truck thanks to the United Way and the Episcopal Church in Connecticut, which now serves 2 of those dinners around the town of Hamden. And we partner with Hamden Plains United Methodist Church for one of those dinners, and one of them is at our church. That was going on long before I arrived. And I think it's a great example, as I was saying to Alison a few minutes ago, of sort of an ethos of reimagining that existed even before I arrived on the scene. I'm sure we'll get into the details of this, but I will point out now that before I arrived, as I arrived, and the ongoing feeling of the church is very much one of, partly out of necessity. So I'll insert this. When I first arrived 6 years ago, the conversation was all about, we're shrinking, we're aging, we're spending more money than we take in. How are we going to create a sustainable future for ourselves? And so I entered in on that conversation, which was very much a reimagining who we are conversation. And that's continued. So I guess reimagining church is in our blood, and this program only added to that in excellent ways. That's enough for now. That's who we are.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Bob, you and I have done some reimagining ourselves in your
That's
space,
true,
thinking
yeah.
about how do we provide housing and shelter for people experiencing homelessness. That's another story.
It'll come up.
It probably will. So you guys have been involved in your congregations for a while. You've got some history, you know that history, you're part of the leadership, and then here come Bill and Joanne and I and say, hey, how would you like to have a student facilitator who might just rock the bones of this church and help you think about doing church differently? Why on earth would you do that? So how was it for you to welcome a student, a stranger, into your congregation to lead this very enthusiastic group of people who very well might shake things up a bit? How did that feel for you guys?
Sure, I'll start.
Okay,
Oh,
good
yeah.
work.
I'm reminded by all your comments that this really is a New Haven story, that Reimagining Church is the story of New Haven as a colony, as it grows into New Haven town, and we're constantly adding churches and merging churches and adding faiths and kind of upsetting the apple cart and making churches do new things. And so in some sense, it's nice to be invited into this experience as kind of a mainline Protestant church, but it happens in the city all the time, kind of around us. And so it's good that we're jumping in, because the church that meets at College Street Music Hall on Sundays gets huge numbers of undergraduates. So there's always this effort to reimagine church and draw and do new things. And so it's good that we're catching up to what's happening all around us. So it was great to be invited in officially. And I guess I should note, Shalom is different too, because we don't have an actual pastor. We're all sort of the pastors. We do everything in this church. And as you were kind of laying out the rules or the expectations for the ask, it's like, we don't have any of that. So it's nice to break rules. So I'm always glad to show up and be like, we're not like any of these people. So what are we going to do? So we kind of arrived with that as kind of who we now are, having been very much the norm for a long time. We're now not at all like the norm, but constantly reimagining who we are and what we do. And a big part of that is working with students in many kinds of ways. So it was great to have a student facilitator come in, partly because it changes the energy of who we are as a congregation. And as such a small group of people, one person can show up and change everything. And it's nice to have someone show up who has a lot of the similarities of the congregation, being that there's so many YDS folks in the congregation, but who also brings different perspective, different generation, in this case, a different part of the country, lots and lots of difference to what we had in our discernment group, though in some ways a lot of similarities. So that was actually really exciting, and it was a perfect pairing for us. And I think a nice way of prompting us as a small group to think about what we could change, what we could do, what we hadn't been doing, and what we wanted to do if we wanted to bring more folks like our facilitator into the community, and what are the kinds of expectations we would need to meet if we wanted to grow in that direction.
Good, thank you. Bob, how was it for you?
Well, I thought it was a very exciting opportunity because we were in the middle of so many changes anyway. So we were in the middle of merging Grace and St. Peter's with St. John the Evangelist. We had probably recently acquired our food truck. So how is that going to play out? As you heard, we are the hosts of Swords to Plowshares, which is a group that turns bought back guns into garden tools. And they live in our garage, and they are an ever expanding project, getting more and more attention around the country. So all these things were sort of in play as you invited me into this process. And I personally, because of my personal background, I spent the first 10 or 12 years of my ministry as a prison or hospital chaplain, healthcare chaplain. So I already have kind of a, well, what is church about outlook on these things. I figure, well, literally wherever 2 or 3 are gathered is where the church is. So I was wildly enthusiastic. I did realize that there were a lot of changes going on already in our parish, and that some people might feel like enough change already. But I met with Lee shortly after our conference. So Lee Phoebus was our YDS intern. And Lee also has a wildly reimagining view of the church. And so we got along very well. And I thought, you know, this is great. Let's introduce to our parish somebody younger considerably than me, and somebody who's bringing new vision and new ideas about what the church can be, and see what that can bring forth from us. So it just, everything just seemed to fall into place well, and off we went.
That's great. And I appreciate both of you and your enthusiasm for the project, that it really worked well for you. But I know from conversations with students, and Bill and Joanne can back me up, there was some resistance along the way as people started to think about new things and trying different things. And so how was that for you? And was there resistance? I mean, you kind of alluded to that maybe some people were like, enough already. So how do you deal with that when you're trying to move something forward and there might be powers or people that want to tighten the reins a little bit?
I'll go first this time.
You should.
I think in the general congregation, and this is probably true about all those changes, there are any number of people who simply go along with it. Okay, well, I guess this is what we're doing, but at least we still have Sunday morning. They're still singing the same hymns we've been singing my whole life, so I'll be okay. Yeah. I don't know that there was any active resistance, but maybe we shouldn't spread this outside of this room. But when I went to the meetings, which I did a few times with the core group, because I'm a person who likes to imagine all possibilities, maybe I did feel a little bit as though they were a little bit restrained in their concept of what Reimagining Church could be. And maybe even, and I confess this, maybe even I prodded a little bit. Sorry, I don't think I was supposed to do that. But I was excited. So I was like, well, what about this? We could do anything.
Well, so speaking of your role, I didn't talk a lot about the role of the pastor in this project. The pastor's not the center of it. Oh, sorry to tell y'all. I'm assuming some of you are pastors in this room. You are not the center of it. There kind of is no center. It's a group. This is a group kind of think, and we want the students to be really connected to the working group. That's the core of it. But certainly this involves the rest of the congregation, and it absolutely involves the ministers. So the students, you met with Lee how often? Pretty regularly?
Yeah, once a month probably.
Mm-hmm. And some pastors want to go to all the working group meetings. That's a lot to ask them to do. We suggest that they maybe not go to all, but let the group move on its own without without the restraint that sometimes, no offense, sometimes having the minister in the room might shut down some conversations. So we want those folks to be free to let it, let it out, talk about it all. But for Bob, it's great that you were able to go to those meetings, and they're used to you. That they know that you're coming to nudge just a little bit towards something different.
And I think also because I came to at least 2 of the plenary sessions. So then I was quite inspired by what I heard. So I was able to bring some of that information back and say, well, what about what we heard on Saturday or whenever the plenary session was?
Good.
So I think that was important too.
Yeah. No minister, and you're no head of Shalom. You're all ministers together there. How was the kind of innovation met by the members of the congregation? Was there unbridled enthusiasm? Was there a little resistance? What did that feel like for y'all?
Pretty much. So we are a planning church. People are used to discussing, how are we going to have service? What is worship going to look like? We have a bunch of circles, and we regularly discuss how to proceed, what's going on with our potluck. And I didn't talk a bit about how we actually meet. So we meet at 5:30 on Sunday evening. We have our service, which is very participatory, and I mentioned that. And then traditionally we have a potluck afterwards. So we're usually there pre-COVID from 5:30 until maybe 8 o'clock, setting up, cleaning up, eating, worshiping, having communion, sort of doing it all there. That all shifted with the pandemic, and we were virtual for a long time. In some ways, being virtual was great. It changed our music. It meant we had lots of resources we could use online that we didn't have in the room. And it also meant that people who had been with us because they had gone to Yale or they had been living in New Haven and who had now moved to Hawaii and Washington, D.C. and Washington State and British Columbia, you name it, Ghana even, could call in at 5:30 and worship with us. And we did that for several years, and some people came every Sunday. And so we suddenly had this congregation that was much broader than the folks who lived in Cheshire and downtown New Haven. And as we started talking about going back to the parish house and being in the room again, which we wanted to do, we realized we couldn't just tell the people who had been signing on from remote, see us whenever you're in New Haven, but you won't be seeing us on Sunday anymore. And that really was the discernment that Katie helped us walk through. We went into the conversations knowing that that was something we needed to work on, and we had grown in that way because of the pandemic, and we had to acknowledge it, and we had to plan for that. And the big question was, well, what do we do? How do we create worship that allows us to be in person, but also to have the folks with us who can't be here for a bunch of different reasons? And that would be true for people who are aging as well, that it wouldn't just be a benefit for people who happen to be in Hawaii. And we had tried some of that during the pandemic with some success, but it was not perfect. And we're a very precise body. People want perfection. And so we will be struggling with that probably forever. But having a convener and having Katie sit with us meant that we really could talk through what's possible, what are the obstacles. And then as we brought that to the larger congregation to hear the response to what we were thinking, and also try to take in and balance some of the things that they thought might also be valuable. They wouldn't be as valuable as what we were thinking, but we wanted to have some meetings where we could have an open forum and talk about, this is the process, this is what we're doing, this is where we are, what do you think about where we are? And for the most part, everybody agreed that we needed to resolve hybrid worship, and we just weren't sure about how we would do that. And there are definitely still challenges, because as the Motown wisdom reminds us, there ain't nothing like the real thing.
Yeah.
And people are so committed to that. It's like, it's good enough, but it's not yet good enough. But I think the tensions in the room were really about knowing what we had and knowing how we had experimented and trying to imagine how we could get to it being perfect for everybody.
So maybe not perfect, but the perfect segue into, what did you spend the money on?
We spent the money on technology.
Yeah.
Technology, but also this sort of, we went down the rabbit hole. There is At the conference level, I guess, there is a minister who works just with the digital realm, and he is amazing. You should definitely call him. And he came out and worshiped with us, and he proposed a system that would help us do what we needed to do. And remember, our virtual worship is not one person leading worship, it's everybody on the call involved in the worship. So the Hawaiians might be serving communion, and the person who is in Glastonbury is doing the invocation and sort of all the opening readings. Someone else is doing the gospel. Everybody should say something in the reflection, because the reflection basically, we hit the gong and then it's open session. It's not a conversation, so you can't just say anything. And no one should be talking back to you, but you can respond to the reading. So everybody has to be able to weigh in, which is why it's so complicated and why they so deeply want it to be perfect, because it really is the chance to worship in ways that they've come to expect. And it's a really complicated experience of worship. So we took the money and we invested in this technology, which lets us do a bunch of that. We also have had the support of the tech minister, the tech minister's partner who comes, some young people from that church who have come a few times, and then other people. So it's kind of incredible. It's more than I imagined we would need or want to mount the service, but it's sort of great to have expanded the community, to have those folks there worshiping with us. And it's sort of nice because the tech minister husband is also a minister, so we get the added benefit of someone else in the room who feels drawn into the worship. And so it's kind of been a great experiment. We've probably had 5 or 6, the ordination and the ecclesiastical council were hybrid in this way, and it was a chance to think through how this would work. And there were some really amazing moments in that. It was like the blessing or something was taped by this guy in Hawaii. I don't even know what faith tradition you would call him, but it was amazing. It was the most amazing thing. I was like, I'm immediately leaving this congregation and going to that man's church. It was that good. And it was like, it was a Vimeo piece that he had done, but the scene was beautiful, and what he said, the charge was incredible, and he was very centered. And so we're all working towards that level of perfection with what we do. And we're getting there. And the experience of doing this and thank you for the money to help us get here, has been this chance to see what's possible and to learn about things we couldn't have imagined, and to think about where we fit in this wide world of what's possible. There was a moment where Eric was saying, well, there's software where you could be only avatars, and you would send your avatar to the mega church, and you could be home in your pajamas. Like, I sort of want to do that. I can't worship like that, but I want to send an avatar to church every Sunday. We're not that church, but it was nice to see what that world was like, and to have the resources to kind of play around with that and think about where we actually fit, and to be able to do something that creates a space for other folks who want to do this kind of hybrid experience to come and use our space and use these resources and tools and learn from this experience, because it's something that other churches will have to wrestle with soon.
Thank you. I want to ask Bob the same question, and we'll take a few minutes to have questions from you guys. So in just a few minutes, can you tell us, what'd you do with the money, Bob?
I can tell you that. I just wanted to say 2 things about Frank's comments. First of all, I am so impressed that you have taken on the hybrid perfection worship challenge. I think we all went through that during COVID, and some of us have backed away, but amazing that you guys are continuing. And also mentioning the pandemic, I think it was a propitious moment, actually, when I got that invitation from you, because we were all coming out of this strange world of hybrid or all on Zoom worship. So inevitably we were thinking, what's church going to look like afterwards?
Yeah.
So it kind of opened the door to that conversation. As far as what we're doing with the money, thank you so much for the money and the Lilly Foundation. So I don't remember exactly what the timeline is, but because I'm only a half-time pastor at Grace and St. John's, we had been worshiping, and I guess it's been 2 years now, every 5th Sunday. They come up 4 times a year, I believe, with our neighboring Lutheran parish. So we would all go to the Lutheran parish where they have a full-time pastor who was therefore leading the worship on the 5th Sunday. And out of that grew the idea of creating garden space, produce garden space, vegetable garden space in our two campuses. They have quite a large campus, maybe 2 or 3 acres actually. So they sort of have unlimited cultivable resources. We have a very smallish, I don't even think it's an acre, but we do have some patches of grass. And out of our plenary sessions and our conversations and our group conversations were asset mapping, I believe that's the word, asset mapping. So I looked around and I thought, what are our assets? So the concept of asset mapping came out of these plenary sessions, as did the witness of the pastor who created this peace park out of his 10 acres.
Right.
And I thought, well, we're not going to make a park out of our 3/4 of an acre. But is there something that we can draw out of these stories and these ideas and apply it to our own parish? And we also have some very talented gardeners. This is the place where I kind of, what about what we just heard in the plenary session about looking at our resources and seeing what we could do? So before I tell you the punchline of that story, I will say that one of the things that the group insisted on and thought was really essential, because we have all these projects going on, is to take a retreat. And so that's actually the thing that came absolutely directly from them. We're going on retreat, and they planned it, and that was part of the funds got used for that as well. And it was a beautiful day out at Killam's Point, which is a UCC conference center out on the waterfront in Brantford. So that was amazing, and a great time for 15 or 18 people just to get together and be with each other in prayer and fellowship for a day. And the thing that came out of these plenary sessions and conversations with Bill and with Alison was, can't we just turn some of our grass space in this world of climate change and concerns about proper use of land and land stewardship and feeding people with fresh produce through Dinner for $1 and through the Keefe Center, which is the community center in Hamden? Can we take even just a little bit of this grassy area and turn it into a food producing garden? And wouldn't it be great if Christ the Good Shepherd, which is the Lutheran Church, could do the same with part of their land? And they were wildly enthusiastic. They might have even been ahead of us in this concept. And so the two of us together, I was sure I could find some initial seed money, because we wanted to get started this growing season and not wait until the end of the internship. So I was certain I could come up with some seed money. That's a terrible pun, isn't it? Oh, sorry.
I wasn't going to laugh, but.
Sigh. Anyway, and so we were able to plant this idea there. That was wildly intentional. And so we each parish started 3 food producing garden beds, and it's amazing how much food these garden beds are producing, in collaboration with the town of Hamden that provided the beds and the soil, and in collaboration between the 2 parishes. And so because we knew we had some funds that could be available to us through Reimagining Church, we decided as a group and a combined collaborative parishes to go big and just focus all the remaining funds on expanding our gardens. So the plan is to put in more garden beds at both parishes, to grow fruit trees, to put in a line of fruit trees, and to extend that out into, I think we were planning for 2 years. So this is adding more garden beds for next year and then continuing that and planting these fruit trees. And we're sharing the funds between us and our Lutheran neighbors, which actually is part of the excitement of this, that part of Reimagining Our Church has been, because of these Fifth Sundays, collaborative Fifth Sundays, has been, what does it mean to no longer just be Grace and St. John's Episcopal Church, but to reach out to our neighbors? So that's what we're doing.
That's fantastic. Let's open it up to some questions. Yes, please.
I'm an alumni of the European School, and I also knew about Reimagining Church. I didn't know this program, but I took a class called for the leadership in public ministries. I involved with the Convocation. Okay, now I want to say about my experience. I work in Philadelphia, and I involved with 3 different kinds of church. One church is LDS Church, Mormon Church, and another one is Lutheran Church, and the third one is Presbyterian church. These three churches are very different. One is very conservative, one is very African American based, another one is very, the third one is very, white supremacy. I feel some, like the Lutheran church are very welcome to LGBTQ group, and another pastor walk they are gay or lesbian or LGBTQ group. And some church are involved, like the Latter-day Saints, they are very conservative. They're really against same-sex marriage, you know. And another one is Presbyterian church. It's more like a lot of African American, but they think white supremacy, racism is really in the helping the American society. So how did you deal with the LGBTQ, and how did you deal with the congregation with the perspective with the racist and against sex, or they're against the LGBTQ, the same-sex marriage? They also have some with like a moment to take the heavy, white supremacy. So how did you deal with the congregations, their stereotype?
We have not encountered those particular issues in that same way, so it's hard to answer that question. I think a lot of us in the room have experience in working with open and affirming congregations, and I'm sure folks would be happy to talk to you about that, but it's not something that any of our reimagining congregations have focused on yet. Yeah. Is there another question? Yes.
I'm pastor in California, Northern California, San Jose. One of the issues with reimagining the church that you're talking about is that most of the stakeholders are not members of the church. A congregation has, by its experience, as you say, by its age, it doesn't have the experience with the high-tech community. It's viewed as saying, well, we want to remake the church, but what they reimagine is something which, as you say, 20 years ago, or they may look ahead, but they're really reimagining what they know. So it seems to me that somehow the real challenge is getting other stakeholders in the community who are not necessarily involved in the worshiping life, but yet realize that the church has some kind of value to them, but they don't know what it is, and you have to somehow bring them in. And the second thing that it seems to me that most people in our community are very secular, ethically diverse. And some of the issues that a friend here brought up about the communities he finds, it's so diverse, but you've got to find your niche, and you've got to find what it is that you can say about growing one's spiritual self, because people in my community don't need another activity. They've got more activities they can dream of. They've got more demands on their children than they can dream of. And they pick up the doggone cell phone. There's 20 more things that they could be doing. So they don't need to say on Sunday morning when they're going to come to church and be part of your community. So it's kind of like, how can you find your niche in a way that you can say that maybe the growth of one's spiritual self or spiritual awareness is, you can get that here. You cannot get that by doing all these other things out there. It seems to me that's one of the biggest challenges. I mean, you've all touched on this in different ways. You're trying to find that, but I know for us, I mean, that's the challenge. And for us, is getting people involved to say, yeah, personal growth, I can get that from you guys, and I see how much you really care about me as a person, and you're not just getting me to do another activity, but you're trying to help me to become more of who God has made me to be.
You want to?
Actually, that is an ongoing conversation in our parish. So we have these, what I think are exciting, innovative outreach programs, service programs. But what's the difference between just, in any context, serving meals for $1 or growing produce and giving it to the community center, or even turning guns into garden tools? What's the difference between doing that and then doing it within a worship faith context? And that is actually an ongoing conversation that one of our parishioners in particular keeps reminding me of. And I think that actually Sunday morning worship is the key to that. so bringing people together and raising up these ministries on Sunday mornings and reminding people, and I like to think that we do this regularly in our preaching, not just mine, but we have several lay preachers also, reminding folks that this is all coming from a faith source. And especially a dinner for $1, because it's actually quite a large community now of people who are guests at our dinners for $1, insisting, again, saying this out loud over and over, that all those people are actually part of our community. And they're not just people that we as a faith community are helping out, but that you come under the umbrella of Grace and St. John's Church, you're part of all of us. So I think that takes some of the edge off of, oh, I have to go serve these people, or I have to go do this task now, and makes it seem like this is actually the work of the church. We're building the church by building community, whether the people are officially on our rolls or not, which doesn't, unfortunately, keep people from getting tired and burnt out, but we try to be sensitive to that too, and say, look, if you're tired and you need to take a break, take a break. In fact, just the other day, this will be my last comment, then Frank can answer. In our advisory board meeting, I actually read through the list, the fairly extraordinarily long list of ministries that we have embarked on for the number of people that are actually in the parish. And I said, this is an extraordinary long list of ministries for the number of people in our parish. Are there any ministries that we think we need to let go of because we just can't sustain them? I was kind of hoping the answer would be yes, but no, they just like, no, this is who we are. This is what we do. We're going to keep doing it.
And I'll just add, reimagining is a practice. It's a discipline. We were sort of pushed into it when Yale created its own church, and we've been having to do that regularly ever since. And it affects everything we do and the ways we operate and think about ourselves as a church. And this was an opportunity to do that more formally with sort of other churches, but it's something we do, and we realize it's a process, and we're always doing that, and it affects how we understand ourselves and our equity pose when we think about LGBTQ issues and Mideast peace and race and identity in America and all those kinds of questions. And we're constantly kind of reevaluating that as a church and as members of this church. Again, in New Haven history, we get lots of modeling of that work going on. And to be clear, there are interesting church starts. That church on College Street that brings all those undergraduates down there every Sunday morning. They're 20 years old.
Yeah.
They go to that church. Their parents aren't making them. They love whatever's happening there. So there's lots of opportunity to think about how we, in these spaces, can connect with people who see church as a vibrant part of their lives and don't need to come to Hamden or other parts of New Haven to get that. And that's the invitation. We can't do that immediately, but at some point we will need to figure out how to draw in those churches as well.
Thank you. It is just after 11. We'll take one more question, and then I think people will hang around if you want. We'll take two more questions here, and then we'll get Diani. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, this is a question from Frank. Frank, you mentioned that you have like a group of 30 people at your congregation. But I had the curiosity, when you start with this new idea, how many members did you have? Or how many people was involved in that beginning? And what challenges did you face?
Oh, I can't remember, but Allie's back there, so she could also answer this.
How many members, Allie?
You mean when we moved?
When we left from Battelle, yeah.
So it actually was in 2005 that happened. And the congregation then at Battelle, University Worship, but also the Church of Christ Yale, two things would happen at the same time on Sunday morning. It had shrunk quite a bit. I would say there may be 60 people on a regular basis or something. But then what happened is some people decided they were committed to Yale and they stayed for University Worship. Some people joined other churches in the community because they wanted music, they wanted preaching. And then there was a small group, there was like 8 or 10 of us at that time that said, okay, we have a charism as a congregation. Some of it is training students and a number of other things. And we wanted to honor that charism. And we were challenged by the conference minister at the time, said, is this about nostalgia? Do you just want to hold on? And it was like the dove flew through the room because it was clear that we really did have, and part of our charism was also peace and justice commitment. And our congregation had been one of the first in Connecticut to become open and firm. And so all of those were things that we felt we were called to honor and continue, which is why, as Frank said, we chose the name Shalom to really lift up that. So we started very small, but the commitment to 5:30, which we didn't want to compete with other UCC churches, and we wanted to be at a time where students could come if they had placements in regular other congregations.
And other ministers, so that people could preach on Sunday morning
Yeah.
and still come worship and not be in charge of worship.
Let's do one more question and then we'll hang around after, but let's be mindful of people's time. Dione, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Well, you know, I'm Jamaica.
Yes.
And so I'm listening to the conversation, and in our theological education training program, students work with churches, but it's always with an understanding that you maintain what you see at the church. You do not have much room for creativity. And then after graduation, you're placed in a church, you're expected to keep that church alive and do more than maintaining the church. And so my question to you is your own willingness to replicate this program through partnership with our seminary in Jamaica. I know it's a big ask. You know,
You need to talk to Bill. I'm pointing to Bill. That's a conversation for you to Bill and him. Yeah, right. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. Bill and I and Reverend Jennings are available by email, phone call if you have questions. If you feel like you want to participate in this program, please reach out to us. Please feel free to, I'm sure these two would be willing to talk to you, as would Jordan out in California. We appreciate you and wish you the best in your own ministry. Thank you for being here this morning.
Please join me in thanking Alison, Bob, and Frank.